Hello everyone, I am Jennifer. Welcome to Whispers of Willowdale, a heartwarming love story set in the peaceful countryside of England. This isn't just a tale of romance. It's a journey of healing, hope, and the soft language of love that speaks without shouting. Whether you're here to feel something real or to improve your English listening skills, this story will touch both your heart and your vocabulary. So sit back, breathe deeply, and step into a world where emotions whisper louder than words.
Today, we're beginning a brand new romantic tale set in the charming English countryside. Listen, learn, and let your imagination wander through the soft whispers of Willowdale, a place where hearts heal and new love quietly blooms. Charlotte had come to Willowdale to escape. She needed calm, not connection. But through the misted window pane, she saw him and everything began to change. Charlotte Bennet stood quietly on the stone pathway that led to the front door of the ivy-covered cottage. Her boots were still muddy from the village bus stop, and the air smelled of wet leaves and firewood. The sky above was soft and gray, like the wool cardigan wrapped tightly around her shoulders. She had left London behind, the noise, the stress, the endless deadlines. After 7 years working as a journalist in the city, her spirit had grown tired. She needed to breathe again. She needed words to flow, not just onto paper but into her soul. The cottage, a 2-bedroom stone home with an overgrown garden, had once belonged to her aunt. It sat just outside the village of Willowdale, tucked between the edge of the woods and the whispering river. Birds sang gently in the distance, and the trees danced with a late autumn breeze. Inside, the place smelled of old books and lavender. Charlotte dropped her bags near the hearth, lit a fire and boiled water for tea. Her fingers, still numb from the cold, reached for the notebook that never left her side. But the pages remained blank. That was when she saw him through the window. In the garden next door, a tall man with broad shoulders and earth-stained gloves was kneeling beside a rose bush. He moved carefully, brushing away old leaves and trimming dead petals as if each flower held a secret. His dark hair curled slightly beneath a wool cap, and his jacket was worn but clean. Charlotte tilted her head, intrigued. There was something gentle in his movements, though his face held no smile. Over the next few days, the pattern repeated. Mornings began with tea, the scent of dew, and the sound of shears clipping nearby shrubs. Charlotte tried to focus on writing, but her attention kept drifting toward the man in the garden. It wasn't just his presence, it was the silence between them, a silence that felt unfinished. On the 5th morning, Charlotte found courage in a spoonful of honey stirred into her tea. Wrapping a scarf around her neck, she stepped out the front door and wandered toward the low fence that separated their gardens. "Your garden is beautiful," she called softly. The man looked up, his eyes, blue like winter skies, met hers. He nodded once, standing slowly, and said, "Thank you, it's the only thing I trust to grow." Charlotte smiled, unsure how to respond. "I'm Charlotte, just moved in." "Henry," he replied, brushing soil from his hands, "been here a while." Their conversation was brief, but something shifted. Over the next few days, their exchanges grew, a few words about the weather, a comment on the flowers. Charlotte learned that Henry had lived in Willowdale all his life. He worked as a gardener, not just in his own patch of earth, but for the village estate nearby. Still, there were questions. Why did he always seem sad? Why did he never enter the village square? And why did he disappear completely on Sundays? Charlotte couldn't stop herself. She asked Mrs. Wren, the elderly shopkeeper, over a bag of flour and tea. "Henry Whitmore," Mrs. Wren said, adjusting her glasses, "a kind man. Keeps to himself, though, lost his wife some years back. Young she was, they say he's not spoken more than a sentence to anyone since." Charlotte felt a pang in her chest. She hadn't expected that. Perhaps his silence wasn't coldness, it was grief. The next morning, she left a small bundle of scones near the fence. No note, no explanation, just an offering. That evening, she found an envelope tucked under her gate. Inside was a single sentence in neat handwriting. "Thank you, they were lovely." And just like that, something began to grow between them, something softer than silence, and warmer than the fire in Charlotte's hearth. Winter came early to Willowdale. The air turned sharp and frost kissed the window panes. But in her heart, Charlotte felt the slow, surprising bloom of something she hadn't known she was missing. One evening, as she sat by the window with her tea and watched Henry trim a lonely holly bush, she whispered aloud, "Maybe I came here to write a story. But I think I'm already living one." Little did she know, Henry was watching her too from the shadowed part of the garden. And for the first time in years, he felt something he thought he had buried deep beneath the roots. They say storms wash things clean, but what if the real storm is inside, between the truth and the feeling we're too afraid to speak? Narrative. It began with a whisper of wind brushing against the old stone cottages. Then came the clouds, thick and heavy, low enough to kiss the tops of the hills. By nightfall, the storm had arrived in full, fierce and wild. Charlotte sat by the fire, the sound of rain tapping rhythmically on the window. The power had gone out hours earlier, and the flames were her only light. Wrapped in a knitted blanket, she listened as the wind howled through the cracks in the walls like a voice too long silenced. She tried to focus on writing, her notebook on her lap, but all she could think of was Henry. Had he prepared for the storm? Was he safe? Suddenly there was a knock. It was gentle, almost hesitant. She stood quickly, heart fluttering. When she opened the door, Henry stood soaked through, his coat clinging to his frame and his cap in one hand. "Your chimney," he said simply. "I saw smoke drifting the wrong way. Winds forcing it back in, dangerous in weather like this." Charlotte blinked. "Oh, I didn't know, thank you." "I can fix it," he added, glancing past her. "Just didn't want to assume." She stepped aside. "Please come in." Inside, Henry gently wiped his boots and hung his coat by the door. His presence changed the air, grounded it, made it warmer. He climbed carefully up to the chimney stack with tools from his own shed. For the next hour, Charlotte brewed tea, listening to the clinking of metal and creaking of the roof above. When he returned, dusted in soot and rain, she insisted he sit by the fire. "I can't thank you enough," she said, handing him a warm mug. Their fingers brushed, a pause hung between them. "Storms like this," Henry said, finally speaking more than a few words, "make everything feel closer." Charlotte nodded, and quieter too. They sat in stillness, the kind that wrapped around them like a second blanket. The flickering light of the fire danced in Henry's eyes. For the first time, she noticed the deep lines of sadness etched gently into his features, not hard, but soft, like they'd grown with him, not against him. "Do you miss her?" Charlotte asked, the words slipping out before she could stop them. Henry didn't flinch. Instead, he looked into the flames. "Every day." "I'm sorry," she whispered. "So was she," he replied quietly. "She was ill, cancer. We thought we had more time." Charlotte swallowed, unsure whether to speak or stay silent. But Henry continued, his voice low. "I stopped talking to people because I didn't know how to explain it. The grief, the guilt. She told me to go on living, but I didn't know how." Charlotte leaned closer, her voice soft. "Maybe living isn't something we figure out in one moment. Maybe we do it a little at a time." He turned to her, truly looking at her now, not just with his eyes, but with something deeper. "You're not like the others who passed through this village," he said. "You stay." "I'm not done writing," she replied, smiling gently, "and maybe I found a better story here than the one I came to tell." Lightning flashed outside, bright and sharp. Instinctively, they both turned toward the window. The garden was soaked, the rose bush swaying in the storm. But it stood tall, rooted in earth and memory. Suddenly, the wind slammed against the side of the cottage, making the window rattle. Charlotte startled. Without thinking, she moved closer to Henry. His hand found hers. Neither of them spoke. When the storm passed hours later, the power returned, but neither of them noticed. They were still by the fire, her head gently resting against his shoulder, his breath calm and even. In the morning, Henry rose early and left without a sound. But on the table where he had sat was a folded note. "Some things take time to grow again. But thank you for showing me they still can." Charlotte pressed the note to her chest. She didn't know what would come next, but she knew something had changed. Not just in the weather, but in them. Every village has its traditions, but sometimes one festival, one night, can change everything you thought you knew about yourself and about love. Willowdale in
Narrative.
December was a postcard come to life. Cobblestone streets were lined with golden fairy lights, and wreaths hung from every wooden door. The river, half frozen, reflected the soft glimmer of lanterns swaying gently in the wind. Charlotte sat at her window, notebook in her lap, watching the villagers set up for the Festival of Light, a tradition that went back centuries. It was a celebration of hope, love, and memory. Everyone in Willowdale lit a lantern for someone they had lost, and one for someone they still held dear. Henry hadn't mentioned the festival. She wondered if he ever lit a lantern for his wife, or if the pain was still too fresh, too raw. Later that day, as she walked toward the square, Charlotte passed the garden fence and saw Henry pruning winter branches with slow, steady hands. "You're not going to the festival?" she asked. He didn't look up, not this year. "Why not?" He paused, "Because I wouldn't know which lantern to light." Charlotte stepped closer. "You can light one for someone you've lost, and one for someone you've found." Henry glanced at her then. His eyes held hers longer than usual. He didn't answer, but his silence said more than words could. That evening, the village square was alive with laughter, warmth, and music. Children ran with scarves flying, and old couples held hands as they moved gently to the sound of a local fiddle. Charlotte wore a dark green coat and soft gloves. Her cheeks were flushed with cold as she carried 2 paper lanterns, one in each hand. The first she lit in memory of her mother, who had passed when Charlotte was only 17. The second she hesitated over. She looked around, unsure if she would be lighting it alone. Then she saw him. Henry stood near the old oak tree, a lantern in his hands. He looked unsure, almost nervous, like a man walking through a memory he wasn't sure he wanted to revisit. He saw her and walked over, his steps slow but certain. "Who are you lighting yours for?" he asked softly. "My mum," she said, nodding to the first. "And well, I suppose for someone I didn't expect to meet when I moved here." He smiled faintly, his breath fogging in the cold. Henry lifted his own lantern. "For Elena," he said, "and for someone who reminds me how it feels to breathe again." Charlotte's heart beat faster. Side by side, they stepped into the center of the square, where 100 villagers stood with their lanterns, ready to release them into the sky. A single bell rang, and then light. Dozens of lanterns rose into the night, carried by the wind, tiny glowing suns floating upward into the black velvet sky. Henry and Charlotte released theirs together, and as they watched them drift higher and higher, their hands found each other. Neither pulled away. After the crowd began to thin, they wandered through the snow-dusted streets. Their hands still joined. Henry spoke more than usual stories about his childhood in Willowdale, how his wife had loved the festival, and how for years he couldn't bring himself to attend. "I thought going would mean I was letting go," he said. "But maybe it just means you're remembering differently," Charlotte replied. They stopped near the edge of the river, where the lanterns still reflected in the water. "Do you ever think about leaving here?" he asked. "I used to," she said, "before I met you." Henry turned toward her, his voice low. "And now? Now I think I might stay if I had a reason." He didn't answer with words. Instead, he leaned forward, his forehead touching hers. And there, in the quiet hush of snowfall and starlight, they shared their first kiss, gentle, unsure, but full of meaning. It wasn't a passionate whirlwind. It was tender, real, like the first page of a book neither of them had expected to write. When they finally pulled apart, Henry whispered, "Maybe this time, the light's not just for memory. Maybe it's for beginning again." Charlotte smiled. "Then let's keep lighting it together." And they walked back toward the village, lanterns behind them, future ahead. Just when love begins to bloom, the past finds a way back, but is it a test or a reminder of what truly matters? The days after the festival were filled with an unfamiliar warmth, not from the fire in Charlotte's hearth, but from Henry's presence. He visited more often, sometimes bringing fresh herbs or bread from the village baker, sometimes just to sit in silence beside her, listening to the soft ticking of the old clock on the mantel. They didn't rush into anything. It was a slow unfolding, like winter melting into spring. One morning, Charlotte woke to the sound of laughter outside. Peeking through her curtain, she saw a woman standing at Henry's gate. She was tall, with auburn hair tucked into a sleek ponytail and a coat that looked too expensive for Willowdale. Henry stood there too, arms folded, his posture stiff. Charlotte stepped outside, pretending to fetch her post. The woman noticed, she turned, smiled politely and called out, "You must be the new neighbor, I'm Marian." Charlotte smiled back, her voice steady. "Charlotte, nice to meet you." But her eyes were on Henry, whose expression was unreadable. Later that day, he appeared at her door. "She's my late wife's sister," he explained. "Marian, she used to visit often when Alina was alive. She's staying in the village." Charlotte asked, offering him tea. Henry nodded, looking down at the floor. "Only for a while, she says she has some business with the estate." Charlotte hesitated. "She's very polished." Henry gave a half laugh. "She always was. Even Alina used to say Marian didn't belong in the countryside." Charlotte didn't say more, but in the quiet space between their conversation, something shifted, not broken, just unsettled. Over the next few days, Marian became a common sight. At the bakery, at the post office, once even in Charlotte's own garden, admiring the frost-covered roses. "You're quite close to Henry," she said lightly. "He doesn't usually open up." Charlotte smiled politely. "He's kind and he listens." Marian tilted her head. "He was never the same after Alina. I always hoped he'd find someone to pull him back into the world. I suppose you're that someone now." Charlotte felt unsure whether it was a compliment or a warning. That evening, Henry didn't come, nor the next day or the day after that. Charlotte sat at her writing desk, her pen unmoving. She didn't want to be jealous, but something didn't feel right. Finally, she walked to his garden. Henry was there, kneeling as always, but this time he didn't rise when she approached. "I've been busy," he said simply. "I noticed," she replied, voice gentle. "Is everything all right?" He hesitated. "Marian brought some old letters. Things Alina wrote when she was sick, things I never saw before." Charlotte felt her heart tighten. "What kind of things?" "She told Marian that I should be free, that I shouldn't let grief cage me. But she also asked Marian to look after me." Charlotte stayed quiet. Henry looked up. "I don't know what that means anymore. I don't know what I owe Alina's memory." "You owe her nothing," Charlotte said firmly. "You loved her, you honored her. But you're still here, Henry, you're still living." He looked away. "I'm afraid that if I move on, I'll lose her completely." Charlotte knelt beside him. "Love doesn't disappear when it changes. It grows, it stretches, it makes space." He took her hand, gripping it tightly. That night, Charlotte wrote for hours. Not about London, not about politics, but about love, the kind that lingers and the kind that arrives softly, unexpectedly. 2 days later, there was a knock at her door. It was Marian. "I'm heading back to London," she said. Her tone clipped. "I just thought you should know's chosen." Charlotte's breath caught. "What do you mean?" Marian shrugged. "He told me he's staying here. With you, he thanked me for the past, but said he doesn't want it to become his future." She turned to leave, then paused. "He never smiled after Alina died. But when he talks about you, his eyes, they shine again." And just like that, she was gone. An hour later, Henry appeared. "I wasn't sure how to say it," he began, "but I want to say it now. I'm choosing you, Charlotte, not as a replacement, not as a second chapter, but as a new book. One I want to write with you." Charlotte smiled through the tears in her eyes. "Then let's begin." And for the first time, Henry took her in his arms, not with hesitation, but with certainty. Together, they watched the snow fall through the garden window. Two hearts no longer haunted by the past, but ready finally to face the future. Sometimes, love is a choice we make again and again. Even when life pulls us in different directions, will the heart be brave enough to stay? Winter in Willowdale was slowly beginning to soften. The days were getting longer, and the sharp edge of the cold had started to fade. Snowdrops bloomed in quiet corners, a sign that spring wasn't far away. Charlotte sat by the fireplace, reading a letter with trembling hands. It was from the London Weekly, the publication she had always dreamed of writing for. Months ago, she had submitted an essay about grief and beginnings, drawn from her early days in Willowdale. She had almost forgotten about it. The editor's letter was short, professional, and life-changing. They wanted her to join their team in London, immediately. She looked out the window where Henry was tending to the garden. He had built a small bench under the rose bush, now bare and quiet in the winter wind. It was where they sat together most evenings now, sipping tea, speaking in soft tones about small things and big feelings. Charlotte folded the letter and placed it inside her journal. She didn't know how to tell him. That evening, as Henry joined her for dinner, she smiled, but the smile didn't quite reach her eyes. "You all right?" he asked, gently placing his hand over hers. "I received a letter," she said softly, "from London." He went still. "The London Weekly wants me to write for them. They've offered a full-time position." Henry's fingers curled slightly. His face didn't show surprise, but sadness flickered in his eyes. "That's your dream," he said after a long pause. "It was," she whispered. "Maybe it still is. I just didn't expect this now. Not after everything here, not after you." Henry stood, walking to the window. "I always knew you might leave." Charlotte rose too. "I don't want to go if it means losing what we have." He turned to her. "I would never stop you. You were never meant to be caged. Charlotte, not by a village, not by a man. You have a voice the world needs." She took a shaky breath. "And what about your world?" "Henry, where do I fit in it?" He stepped close. "Right here, always." Tears brimmed in her eyes. Later that night she lay awake, listening to the ticking of the clock. She imagined life in London, rushing subways, noisy cafes, editors, and deadlines. It was familiar, ambitious, exciting. But when she imagined waking up each morning, the only image that gave her peace was Willowdale. And Henry. The next day she walked to the post office. She had written a letter of thanks to the editor, along with her response. She declined the offer. Instead, she sent them another essay, this one titled, "Where Roses Bloom in the Snow." A story about a village, a gardener, and how sometimes love plants new roots when we least expect it. 2 weeks passed, the snow began to melt. On the first true day of spring, Henry surprised her. He had transformed the garden. The once silent rose bush now stood proud with fresh buds, and under it on the bench sat a wooden box. Charlotte opened it. Inside was a leather-bound notebook. On the first page, in Henry's neat handwriting, were the words, "For every story yet to come, ours." She looked up. He was standing behind her, holding 2 mugs of tea. "I wanted to give you something," he said, smiling, "a place to write from here." She wrapped her arms around him. "I chose to stay," she whispered, "not because I gave up something, but because I found something better." He pressed his forehead to hers. "And I'll choose you every day." They sat together on the bench, as the first rose of spring bloomed beside them. Not every love story is loud, some whisper. And this one, in the quiet corners of Willowdale, whispered forever.
Thank you for listening to Whispers of Willowdale, a story of quiet gardens, second chances, and love that grows like roses in the snow. We hope Charlotte and Henry's journey helped you not only feel something beautiful, but also improve your English listening in a meaningful way. Every word you heard, every sentence you understood, was one step forward in your language journey. Remember, the heart learns best when the story feels real. Subscribe for more peaceful, powerful stories and let love and learning grow together.